Hello and welcome to episode number 111 of The Pitcher or the Hitter, the podcast by the M-SABR Dynasty League for the M-SABR Dynasty League. I am Cam.
I'm Sahil.
And we are back after another bit of an extended break. I know we haven't been quite as active this off season. I will. We did record, in the sake of transparency, a full intro a couple weeks ago, but took a while to get around to editing it, and now it's all out of date, so we're just recording another one.
Yes, we are recording a new intro, but the main segment that we recorded is staying the same. That is not out of date, and we are very excited to tack that on to the end of this intro.
Exactly, yeah, so that's going to be the most likely yellow boxes to remain in the sheet. Very fun segment, one of my favorites we've ever done. And that has not luckily changed since we recorded. There was a bit of a scare that Ruthvik might cut Helio Ramos, but luckily that has not yet happened, and we are still good to go with those.
I don't even know if there's a threat of him cutting Helio Ramos as much as it was me just trying to bully him and doing the right thing.
Well, don't bully him too hard until this episode's out.
Yeah, don't worry. I'll make sure the episode goes up, and literally the second after that, I'll hammer in the trade. But speaking of trades, we have a lot of them to talk about. 6 in total. It's been a while since we last talked. So this first trade happened on February 28th. Bo with the Flow agreed to trade Stephen Kwan, Paul Sewald, and his 2024 second-round pick to EBO in exchange for Jesus Luzardo. The episode before this one, we had discussed Jake's rotation and some of the concerns there with the lack of depth, which I guess was amplified by the Carlos Rodon injury. And now he comes out here and acquires another starter for some depth. Cam, why don't you give your thoughts on the trade first?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely a good idea for him to get some starting depth. It's a very top heavy rotation, but after that, I guess Brian Bayo is back from his injury. He's pitching now. We thought that was going to be a more long-term thing than it ended up being. But yeah, even still, I don't love the depth. So getting a guy like Luzardo, hey, it's hard to get a young pitcher in this league. Luzardo is 26, 25. He doesn't have a lot of innings on his arm. He was really solid last year. He had a 312 FIP. Really good at limiting home runs, struck out a lot of guys, brought the walk rate way down. So I think he's a phenomenal get for Jake and this rotation. I like him a lot. I'm surprised he gave up Quan because he was a guy that Jake really liked, a guy that came up through the minors, debuted with his team. But yeah, just like Jeremy Pena, I guess Jake found some of his young guys expendable, even when after they've proven they've done well in the majors. If he decides there's another need for him.
Yeah, I think Jake acquired the higher risk, higher reward player. I think EBO kind of acquired a nice solid floor player here, but I don't think there's necessarily a huge ceiling with Stephen Kwan. I don't think he's a big power or speed threat, although I do like his ability to get on base. I feel like EBO, if I was them, I would have just kept Luzardo. Like you mentioned, it's hard to get younger starting pitching. And EBO definitely has a lot of interesting BAP prospects coming up through the minor leagues. But I also see some of the real risks with Luzardo, and I could see this trade very early in the season, maybe looking like a W for EBO if Luzardo continues his trends of not being able to stay healthy, if his command regresses a little bit. I mean, he was fantastic this year, 3.32 ERA, 3.12 FIP. But he only pitched 100 in the third innings because he got hurt. That's his career high in the majors. So, we'll see if he's able to keep that up. But I think the upside is sky high there, and I think he's a worthy gamble for Jake. Luzardo's somebody I personally really like. I was trying to acquire him for a while from both them and Alex when Alex had him earlier this offseason.
Yeah, so I think yeah, you made a good point. Like, why would EBO trade Luzardo? Especially since they really didn't get crazy return for him. They got an okay return, but it wasn't anything wild. And I know they got, yeah, Luzardo was kind of the second piece in that Willy Adames deal. But yeah, they gave up some great prospects, and it was a deal that they won, the deal where they got Luzardo, I'd say. But they still gave up Gavin Williams and Bobby Miller and Michael Bush, who were all stud prospects. So yeah, giving them up for Stephen Kwan, really a 1 or 2 category guy, plus a closer I have some concerns about, and then a low second rounder. I think I don't love the deal for them.
No, me neither. I think it's not like they had a lot of starting pitcher depth or they really had a substantial need in the outfield. I mean, I think they might have overreacted a little bit to the Gavin Lux injury and some of the other injuries that they had out there. They have plenty of solid outfield prospects just sitting there that I think will take some of those spots eventually anyways. They still have Kerry Carpenter, Jackson Churio, Cedane Rafaela, Parker Meadows. So I don't know. We'll see what happens.
That's right. They are the owners of Jackson Churio after all.
Yes, they are.
But yeah, let's move on to the next trade. This was one of yours. You sent Bryce Miller, Cooper Jerpy, and Tyler Locklear to Alex for Kyle Bradish, Jackson Jobe, and Justin Henry Malloy. And you're just doing the same thing over and over again. And no one's stopping you.
I mean, you're not totally wrong. I think Bryce Miller has sky high potential, and Alex has also mentioned it as well. Really liking him. He cracked the Fangraphs top 100. He's on Baseball America's top 100. Yes, I picked him up earlier this offseason, but I think it would be selling him short just to say, oh, he's just some random guy you picked up. I actually think this is a very real, legitimate prospect. But for me, Kyle Bradish is like maybe not quite the ceiling of Bryce Miller, but he's actually done it in the majors, and he's only 26. Like Bradish, if you look at his numbers in the first half of the season, they were abysmal. I think his ERA was like 7. He got sent down, he came back up. He performed a lot better. His ERA was around 3 in the second half of the season. I'll pull up the exact number here. 373 fit. And there's a couple of things I like. He made some adjustments to his slider, which has made it even more lethal. And he's also shown a gain in velocity this during spring training. And that to me was kind of like something I was like, hey, this is a trend I want to hop on. I know I already have a bunch of other starting pitchers, but you always need depth. McCullers has heard from me. So I was like, hey, he's an Oriole pitcher I really like. Let me go and take that gamble. There was a lot of people in the fantasy industry who are also really high on him. And I'm really excited to see how this goes. I mean, there's definitely a downside risk where like by the end of April, he's blown up like 3 or 4 times. And I end up just having to cut him, especially if McCullers comes back by then. But I think he's going to be pretty solid for this Orioles team. And I think he could be a nice back of the rotation fantasy starter for me. Cooper Jerpy, I really like as well, but he was a 3rd round pick. He's still a pitching prospect. Tyler Locklear is another guy, like also a guy I picked up off of waivers, but wasn't really too torn up about giving him up. Jackson Jobe.
We'll talk about Jackson Jobe in a little bit.
Yeah, we'll talk about him in a little bit. That's fine. Justin Henry Malloy, I mean, I had him earlier this offseason. I was shopping him. I mean, we kind of told his whole story. And then Alex basically told me he was done with Tigers prospects. And I was like, he was gonna cut Justin Henry Malloy. And I was like, okay, you know what? I'll just take him back. The numbers were still really impressive last year. I'm not sure what he's going to become in the majors, but the opportunity should be there, and I'm intrigued enough by the minor league numbers to at least give him a chance here. So, overall, I mean, I think Bradish is a really interesting prospect or a major league player now. He's graduated from prospect eligibility. And I'm excited what he can do this year. And it's nice to actually have an Oriole starting pitcher. It's weird. Like I haven't had one since like the Dylan Bundy, Kevin Gausman days, and those were not good days. So I'm excited.
I mean, unless you include when you owned Grayson Rodriguez briefly in the minors, but yes.
Yeah, in the majors. Let's yeah. That
yeah. Did you own John Means? I thought you did at one point.
I never owned John Means. I'd been offered him in the past, but just never really got on board with him. Didn't think the upside was there. And then he dealt with some injuries and stuff. And, just timing's never really worked out for me to acquire John Means.
Yeah, that's fair. I think I don't hate Bryce Miller as much as you think I do. I think he's an interesting guy. But there's like the worry, like he also just might be this year's Brandon Williamson.
That's also
Mariner. But he's jumped up on a lot of boards. He's a guy who's actually seemed to people like him more than they did at the start of the offseason. So it's not the worst. Unlike guys like Tyler Locklear, you just pick up and flip casually. Overall, I guess this trade's not the most egregious since I don't love Kyle Bradish as much as you seem to. He's fine, I guess. How about the next trade, though? This was a rare Yuki Ruthvik trade. Yuki sent Cal Quantrill, Connor Norby, and Justin Crawford to Ruthvik for Owen White and Mason Wynn. Weird, like, all prospects deal.
Yeah,
for the most
all
part.
Prospects in Quantrill. Yeah, I like this better for Ruthvik. I think Norby is the best prospect of the group. I think Mason Wynn's kind of a flashier name because, he has a great throwing arm, but I'm not as excited about his bat. Maybe as some other people are. Whereas I think Norby has the offensive talent. I worry a little bit about the defense. Which is not really relevant for fantasy. I will say though, I've heard a lot about like Jordan Westberg is striking the ball with authority this spring training, and Colton Cowser's looked really good into spring training, and some of these other guys. I have not heard a lot about Connor Norby, so I don't really know how things are going for him this spring training, and I should probably dig a little deeper into that. I think Justin Crawford's a solid get for Ruthvik as well. He's someone I kind of had a mid to late second round grade on draft day. I think he's a kind of a high risk, high reward guy, but I think the raw talent's there. Owen White, really interesting prospect. He had a really good year, but he's dealing with a neck injury right now. And I wonder if Yuki knew about that when he traded for him or not. It took me a little while to dig that one up. After the trade happened. But a neck injury for a pitcher really concerns me. So, and then Cal Quantrill's like fine. I don't think he's anything special, but he's like decent rotation depth, and Yuki has like no rotation depth. So it's a little weird for Ruthvik too, because Ruthvik has like an ungodly amount of.
Yeah, why does Ruthvik keep doing these trades? And this is, I mean, I've just felt very flabbergasted by all of the trades that are in this episode. And this is another one. Like, what's Ruthvik doing? Like, getting Cal Quantrill. Value-wise, it's probably a little better for him. Quantrill's fine. He doesn't strike anyone out. I don't love Justin Crawford. Yeah, Owen White's solid, but yeah, he does have that neck injury. Mason Wynn's a big name. I don't know. I think it's maybe fairly even value-wise, but I don't know what's going on with that.
Do you wanna guess how many starting pitchers are currently on Ruthvik's active roster, so not including his IL?
I'm gonna say 10.
13.
13.
Was
Oh my God.
with Joe Musgrove, who looks like he'll be off the IL very shortly into the season, like being that 14th. He still has Vaughn Grissom on his major league roster. He does not have a bench back. Can we talk about this for a second? I mean, there's been a lot of discussion over the years, especially with us adding more bench spots. We added a second util spot, right? About like what's the appropriate number of bench bats to have. And granted, I don't agree with these teams who are like, hey, I need to have like 5 or 6 bench bats. I don't think there's any teams that do that actually, but I think there's a point where it gets excessive. But you have to prepare for like injuries, for demotions, stuff like that. He's already relying on one guy that was a waiver wire pickup earlier this offseason in Wilt Myers. He's now going to have to pick somebody up off of waivers to replace Grissom. And this isn't to say that Ruthvik's not going to get any more injuries. I mean, or demotions like Oswaldo
Arcia?
Peraza.
Oh, Peraza.
I
No,
always forget
Cabrera.
what it is.
It's Cabrera. Oswaldo Cabrera, Oswald Peraza.
Okay. Oswald Peraza could get sent down, kind of like Vaughn Grissom does. I think that's
Wait, no, I think Oswald Peraza, and I'm keeping this all in. Oswald Peraza is the one on Eric's team.
No, I'm looking at Rusvik's roster right now. He has Peraza.
Okay, he has Peraza. Okay. Peraza's the good one. Cabrera's the bad one.
I don't even think Cabrera's that bad. I just think that Peraza's the better one. I think Cabrera could carve out a role. I just don't know if it's like the sexiest fantasy role. I think he might be more of like a super utility guy than like a legitimate everyday starter.
I think, yeah, that's fair.
But like also like Starling Marte, injury history, like Ronald Acuna Jr. He came back from a torn ACL last year. What if something happened to him? Santander hasn't been the healthiest throughout his career. Last year was the first year he was really super healthy. Like, it's Max Kepler's listed as day-to-day on here. Like, there's just no preparation in. We've said this over and over again. If you're going to trade somebody starting pitchers for bats, it makes sense, but he's just not going to do it. And in a league where you have a 12 start limit, you don't need 14 starting pitchers. I'm sorry. Like, I don't. This team keeps dropping steadily in my internal power rankings, and it's going to bottom out really soon if it hasn't already. When we, I guess, quick preview for next week, we're doing power rankings. So we'll see how low Ruthvik is, but my God, this is the most poorly constructed team in the league from a pure positional context.
Yeah, and I don't think this helped.
Oh, can I say one more thing before we go into that?
Yeah, sure.
This Edwin Diaz injury is really a bummer for him, and I don't know if starting pitching is necessarily the right way to go out and replace that. But what would have been more interesting for me is if he, instead of getting Cal Quantrill, is like, hey, Yuki, give me someone like Scott Barlow. Because then he fills the Diaz hole. Even if it is another pitcher, instead of getting a hitter, at least he's getting a reliever. All right, enough railing on Ruthvik's team. I feel like we do this once an episode now.
Yeah, I think we should change the name of the podcast to Railing on Ruthvik's Team.
Be a great title. Oh my God.
But yes, you traded for Trey Mancini, partly because of Altuve's injury. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I traded Addison Barger for Trey Mancini. Barger is another guy that I picked up off.
Yeah, who is that?
He's the 53rd ranked prospect on Fangraphs. He's blocked right now by like Bichette and Chapman and Santiago Espinal and Whit Merrifield and, dare I say, Kevin Biggio. I think I was listening to a podcast where Eric Longenhagen was describing him basically as like kind of a bat first, like utility guy who could play all over, but who could probably hit enough to like hold down a regular lineup spot. I think it's somebody who could potentially be relevant in fantasy, but I also don't think it's like the highest ceiling type of guy. And I have a lot of AAA infielders, and I didn't necessarily know if he was going to crack my team. But I think he's a little better than your typical, hey, some rando that just gets picked up and flipped. Mancini, let's see, I counted this after I made the trade. I traded him away in that 3-team deal in the first season. I reacquired him from you for Miguel Amaya. Remember him in the second season? Held on to
Yeah,
him through the rest of that season, then the COVID year when he had cancer, and then all of 2021. I traded him last year in March in that deal for Joey Votto and Henry Davis. That was when we all learned about Josh H. Smith. Um, Reacquired him from EBO in like May, shipped him off to Yuki in yet another 3-team deal. That was the one that netted me Taylor Ward, I want to say, quote me on, yeah. And then now I reacquired him. So it's an interesting history, but I only had 6 healthy infielders because Altuve and Polanco are going to start the season on the IL, and Tatis still has 20 more games in a suspension. That means that Muncy goes kind of from playing a utility role, and Correa as well from slotting my util spots kind of into my infield spots. It does mean while Mancini's first and outfield eligible, he's on a direct second base replacement. He is at least quarter infield eligible, so it gives me a little bit of leeway there if one of the other infielders I have gets hurt. But in the short term, this is a little bit of a concern for me because I have one healthy eligible second baseman, that's Muncy, and I have 2 healthy third basemen. One of them's Matt Chapman. The other one's is Muncy, and Muncy's not really a third base backup anymore because he's my starting second baseman. So it's a little thin. Altuve looks like he's going to be out until early June. I don't know what a timetable is on Polanco. So this is just something to watch out for. I mean, we've talked about Jake's injuries in the last podcast, and I'm not going to pretend that we could just sit here and talk about everybody else's injuries and how it's going to negatively affect their teams, and just ignore how it's going to affect our team. So Mancini's just a little bit of insurance, not the perfect positional fit, but I think he's going to rebound a little bit in Chicago this year. And for the price I had to give up, I'm very happy to add him back to the roster. And if nothing else, he's one of my favorite players. So always fun to have him on my team.
yeah, no, he's a fun guy to have. I think this is, and we'll see this with the next trade too. This is the off season where you just kind of figured out you can do whatever you want, and no one's gonna stop you. Like you can just get a real bat for a guy you picked up for free, and you've done that like 6 times already this offseason. And it's yeah. I don't
Yeah,
really have words for it anymore.
I think it's a little more complicated than you're making it, but yeah. Let's talk about these next 2 trades. These drew, not the first one, but the second one drew a lot of controversy in Slack amongst all of you folks. There were 2 Cody Bellinger trades yesterday. We're recording this on the 22nd, so yesterday being the 21st. The first one was I agreed to trade Jackson Jobe and Alex's 2025 third to Daniel and Matt for Cody Bellinger. Do you want to start out with this one? I just spent a while talking about Trey Mancini.
Yeah, so well, talking about them in tandem, yeah, Jackson Jobe, he did just have that injury, so that's tough. I kind of had like a mid-second round grade on him at the time, so a second and a third for Bellinger. isn't that much different than a second and a third and a catching prospect and a fringy outfielder for Bellinger. Yeah, you got more for Bellinger than you gave up, and you made these trades on the same day. And I can't believe you were able to start a bidding war for Cody Bellinger on the same day that you traded for him. Like, going to the thing I was talking about, how does this happen? It's like this could never happen if I did this, and this could never happen if like another team tried this. I didn't. I tried to name a random team off the top of my head and decided not to single out a person. But yeah, I don't know how you do this. You can, yeah, start a bidding war randomly for a guy that everyone agrees is washed up. Although I think there's something left in his bat, and there was a conditional pick in there to that effect. And maybe the change of scenery does something for him. But the fact that you can start a bidding war for Cody Bellinger at this stage is crazy.
Yeah, it's funny because like my first text after I made this trade was to Alex, because I know Alex like when I'd hypothetically shop Bellinger earlier this offseason when I was in talks to acquire him, like Alex was interested. And Alex was like, Alex offered a 2026 second round pick. Even then, I think he was a little unsure, but he was like, it would be really funny if like a Cody Bellinger bidding war went down, like really like over him. And then I ended up texting him 2 hours later and being like, there actually was a bidding war for him. So that was kind of funny. But to the trade specifically, I mean, Jackson Jobe, when I acquired him from Alex, I was more or less like, hey, he's a Tigers prospect. I'm not super high on him, but he was drafted like 6th overall in our prospect draft. Or 7th, I want to say 6th.
Yeah, somewhere in the
Right.
middle
So
there.
like, it felt like a low cost gamble. Like, hey, if he realizes that potential, like, I could get a better return for him. And like, if not, like he wasn't the main part of the trade. Right. I didn't expect he was going to get hurt like 48 hours after I traded for him, which as an aside is kind of weird because I feel like the Tigers probably had some idea about this for a while, but there was like nothing that like no reports that like, hey, he's being held out, whatever. It's just all of a sudden like 3 to 5 months he's out. And the second I heard that, I was like, I have to get rid of him ASAP. Because the way he's performed so far, if he had any sort of setback in his recovery, or if it was closer to that 5-month mark than that 3-month mark, like he legitimately could have just been somebody who was like a cut in the middle of the season. And I was like, it's not worth hanging on to him. Let me see if I could find a taker. I knew that Daniel and Matt had said earlier this offseason that they wanted to trade Cody Bellinger because he was a Cub. And Daniel had said, hey, Cody Bellinger is somebody that I will cut if I do not trade him by opening day. Well, we're getting closer to opening day. He hasn't made a move on him. I hadn't seen him shop him. So I was like, hey, Jackson Jobe for Cody Bellinger, pair of buy low guys. They wanted the third in. I was like, whatever, it's a 3rd round pick. We closed that deal. Afterwards, I'm like, I have Bellinger. I wasn't opposed to hold on to Bellinger. Like, for as bad as the OBP was for Bellinger last year, like he still had 19 home runs and 12 steals, right? There's some utility in that. I think that he can't be as bad as he was with the Dodgers last year. I think the change of scenery could help. And the upside's immense. So I was like, hey, as a last bench bat, I'm fine with holding on to him. Like, that would be that. However, having acquired Mancini 2 days before, I was like, I don't really know if I want to be holding on to both of these guys. I know that I'm going to get a couple guys off of the IL/suspension pretty quickly. And Tatis and Suzuki. And I was like, I could have a really big roster crunch. Plus, there's a couple guys that I've picked up, i.e. TJ Friedl, that I wanted to give a chance to. So I started shopping Bellinger. And, I was able to start this bidding war a little bit. And ultimately, Yainer Diaz is a Fangraphs top 100 guy. I think he's a bat first catcher. Bat first catcher. I think he might play a little bit at like first in the outfield as well, just to get his bat in the lineup because he's not as good defensively. But I think there's enough intrigue in the bat where I'm like, hey, like why not? Although he interestingly was a guy I caught earlier this offseason. So I don't know. We'll see with him. Connor's 2024 second was what I was really after. I'm not 100% sure that Connor's going to be a playoff team again. I don't think he's really done enough to improve his team this offseason. And he's got some guys coming with some key injuries, mainly Trevor Story. So I think that pick could be a little higher than some people think it's going to be. The conditional third is based off of Bellinger hitting 20 home runs. He hit 19 last year. I feel like there's a pretty reasonable chance that that happens. And Brandon Marsh is a throw in. Like, maybe I trade him. Maybe he's cut by the time this episode comes out. I'm not really sure. Maybe I keep him. But EBO was going to cut him to make room for Bellinger. And I was happy to at least take him on for the moment. I think Bellinger's the right type of player for them to add, you know, despite all the other stuff that's been said. For some of the reasons that we've outlined with the upside for Bellinger and kind of where EBO's window is and what their you know, the age of a lot of their players is. They do have a lot of picks. They do have a pretty loaded farm system as is. So giving up these picks and a couple fringe guys from their farm system really at the end of the day is not going to affect them that much if Bellinger completely flops on his face and they're cutting him by the end of April. And the upside is huge. So I think it's worth it for both teams. I think Zane in his head kind of rationalized how the two returns to Job in a third and what he gave up are kind of equal. I personally think that what he gave to me was worth more than Job in a third. But I mean, that's just kind of how it went down. I didn't expect there to be a little bit of a bidding war. I don't know if people just thought that Bellinger wasn't available from Daniel Lamont. I'm not really sure what the deal was. I'm not really sure why he became more interesting to people after I acquired him.
Because that's what happens to every player.
I think you're overrating my abilities. I think I just had a read on what the different markets were like, what different players people needed, what moves people wanted to make. I don't know. That being said, for the record, I think there's a non-zero chance, more non-zero summit short. I think there's a real chance that this trade really backfires on me. Like, I think there's a chance Bellinger bounces back. So, it will not surprise me if he does. Bouncing back, not to like MVP level, but to being like a legitimate major league regular. I can see that happening.
I don't know. We'll see about that. I'm surprised that you were able to flip Job to a team that's not Tigers fans.
None of the Tigers fans wanted him, interestingly. Like, even before the injury, like I offered him immediately to Zane and Eric. Zane was like maybe a third round pick in 2027, which I took to be, yeah, he's not interested. And then Eric and I almost consummated a Jackson Job for Dalton rushing deal.
Oh God, that would have been a steal for you.
Yeah, and he backed off at the last second, and then Job got hurt. So that was kind of that. But yeah, I mean, I was happy to be able to trade him for Bellinger still. I mean, I think at the end of the day, with some of these trades, it's like if you're going to make multiple trades like I am, like try to acquire players that are more interesting to other people. And I thought Bellinger would be more interesting as a trade chip than Job. So I guess it worked out. Sorry to anybody get upset. Like, I don't know. I feel like every trade I make now is met with like some degree of anger, or skepticism, or frustration.
I think there's definitely a wonder as to how you pulled it off. But yeah. Anyway, before we get into our segment, one last thing to talk about. You mentioned that you had added TJ Friedl as a bench bat. We have a fun little bet for this season.
We do. It's not just a fun little bet. It's a fun little Mookie bet.
Of course.
Hey, you were the one who came up with it off air, so you can't complain now. When I pulled out, but our bet is based off another outfielder that Cam just picked up. Somebody I was surprised he picked up instead of TJ Friedl, and somebody who I think who you all know I think is just a generally terrible player. It's Adam Duvall.
He's not a terrible player.
He can't get on base. He was just he had one season in 2021 where it's like, what the fuck just happened after like 3 seasons of mediocrity. And even then, he only got on base at like a 280 clip. Like, he's the anti-Cam. Like, your whole thing is getting players with like high on base percentages, and he's like a 270 career OBP guy.
I mean, he's just a dude. He hits the ball far. What can I say? And our bet is between which of the two of them will hit more home runs, and I'm very confident that Adam Duvall will.
No, it's not. Duvall hit 12 home runs last year. He had 38 in 2021, I'll give you that, but then 16, 10, and 15 in the 3 years before that. TJ Friedl hit 8 in 258 plate appearances in the majors and 8 in 241 plate appearances in AAA. He's playing in a better ballpark to hit home runs. I think he's going to take another step this year. Like, I think he could get to 20 home runs. I don't think Adam Duvall is going to hit 20 home runs. I think Adam Duvall is going to flame out in Boston. I didn't understand the signing at the time, and I don't see it. There's no way they're going to let him play center field every day. There's no way that's going to work out.
He plays a little center field. He's got a good glove. I'm not worried about that.
No, this isn't unmitigated.
I think either way, both of these guys are probably going to be off our rosters on opening day.
No, I am. Andrew knows this. Andrew and I were talking about this on the Gallardo Cup Dynasty call. He and I have been indoctrinated all off season listening to pro TJ Friedl content from the Fangraphs Fantasy podcast. And I'm kind of bought in. I still think Jake Fraley might be the better red outfielder to gamble on. But I'm on the TJ Friedl hype train. There's an article that came out this year. Cedric Mullins, #1 player listed, TJ Friedl.
I mean, I'm definitely excited about him, but not in like a way that I'm going to say he's going to hit a lot of home runs this year, and not in a way that I think you're going to hold on to him on your fantasy team.
He's going to get an audition. I'll say that. He will definitely be on my roster on opening day. I will say that much. Barring trades, because we all know there's one thing I do. It's
exactly. There's going to be trades. There's going to be someone else you trade for that makes Friedl expendable.
Right, but I traded for a bat and traded that bat away because I wanted to gamble on TJ Friedl.
I don't know. There's always someone else. You'll pick up Tyler Locklear again off free agency and trade him for Mookie Betts, who somehow you had already traded for. I don't know. You're gonna do something.
I feel like you overrate my ability to trade. I'm flattered, but no. Friedl has an audition for as long as it takes Tatis to get back. Because I'm assuming Suzuki comes back before then. And if he's not hitting when Tatis gets back, he's gone. And maybe sooner if he's not hitting. But he looks really good this spring.
He does. I do like that. I enjoy seeing that.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe I'll flip TJ Friedl for a first round pick.
I mean, I think you maybe will.
Remember last year when I picked up Brandon Drury and then 5 days later I flipped him into Chris Bassett? Like, maybe it's another one of those situations.
I wouldn't be shocked. I've seen stranger things.
Have you?
Yeah, I watched the 4th season when it came out.
Love it. I'm glad you realized I was kind of trying to set you up for that. But
All
yeah.
right. I think that's enough TJ Friedl talk. Are we ready for our segment?
Yeah, I'm ready for a segment.
Here is how this segment is going to work. We have ranked all 21 players who are currently yellow boxes in that spreadsheet. We each ranked them individually, and then we came together and combined our rankings to come up with one big list, and we are going to rank them in order from number 21, most likely to leave the soonest, and least likely to be the last one standing, to number one, who we think is going to be the last one standing from our inaugural draft, which is now coming up on 5 years ago, because we're going into our 6th season. Yeah, absolutely crazy. Crazy. There are 480 draft picks in the inaugural draft, and there are only 21 still with those teams just 5 years later.
But without further ado, Cam, would you like to break or start off the segment with number 21?
Yeah, number 21, and this is someone we both agreed on being the most likely to move, most likely to be gone first, and that is Yasmani Grandal from Anthony's team. Anthony and Michael Resnick's 16th rounder from that inaugural draft.
Yeah, I think the case here is pretty straightforward. Anthony got Sean Murphy from you last season, and he's also rostering Joey Bart, although I don't think he should be rostering Joey Bart. So there's no real reason to roster Yasmani Grandal coming off a down season. I do think he's a decent buy low candidate for someone. And I also know that Anthony needs a corner infield. His CI spot is currently empty, so I could see Grandal maybe being the one that gets sacrificed for that. So I think Grandal could be off of Anthony's roster as soon as before the season starts.
Yeah, exactly. Especially since he's got Andy Rodriguez currently in AAA. Yeah, weirdly enough, ESPN in their infinite wisdom has Grandal pegged for a 362 on base percentage this coming year. I don't know where that came from.
That doesn't totally surprise me though, because he's always been a high walk rate, high OBP guy. Like even last year when he batted 202, he had a 301 OBP. He had a 12% walk rate. I think ESPN's probably putting a little too much weight into his 2021 numbers, where he had a 23.2% walk rate, and a 420 OBP. Like fucking insane. But a lot of the projection systems, like the BAD, ATC, ZiPS, all happen between like a 335 and a 353. So maybe they aren't totally far off.
Yeah, I think this is a scenario where the projections don't pass the smell test. But
yeah,
either way, yeah, I think he's Yuki's third or I said Yuki because we're talking about catchers.
Yeah, naturally.
He's Anthony's third or fourth best catcher in a dynasty format at the time. So I think he's gone soon.
Yeah, no, I think very fair. Number 20. This is also a guy that you and I agreed on, and that's Jay Groom. Jay Groom was Kyle's 23rd round pick. Going into the round with names such as Blake Trinan, Clint Frazier, Brian McCann, Cole Hamels, Mitch Haniger, Corbin Burns, and Juan Soto. What a round. Jason Groom before both Soto and Burns. I'm sure Kyle at the time would have loved to have had that pick back. But yeah, tell us why we ranked Jason Groom 20th.
Yeah, so I think each of the last 2 years, if we had done this, we probably would have still ranked Jay Groom bottom 2. And frankly, last year he would have been behind Grandal. Yeah, I don't know why. Essentially, the point is we don't know why Ruthvik's held on to him for this long. He's not a prospect. He hasn't been ranked anywhere since 2018. and yet he's just kind of come up. The Red Sox got rid of him. He was with the Padres AAA last year, and he was okay. He might come up and end up in that bullpen at some point this year. So he is kind of knocking on that door, which does mean that there's a little bit of wiggle room before Ruthvik needs to make a decision on him. But yeah, I don't see him lasting past the end of this season, but I would have said that last year too.
Yeah, I think the difference this year is that Ruthvik finally has to make a decision on him. Like the Red Sox are willing to trade him for Eric Hosmer, which I think says something about how they view Jay Groom. And I think that Padres rotation is even deeper. There's no reason he's going to crack that rotation. It's not like the minor league numbers were particularly exciting. I think Ruthvik's held on for like nostalgia's sake, but he'll be forced into a decision soon. And I think he's going to cut him. Like, I don't think anybody would pick him up if Ruthvik dropped him. He should not be on the roster. I think it's pretty
absolutely. Yeah, he could have. Yeah, at many points this past year, and the year before, could have dropped him for a better prospect, but he didn't. So I don't really expect him to do that until he has to.
Yeah, no, very fair. But our number 19 guy, we both had ranked 18. So you and I both had ranked guys individually 19, but we're kind of canceled out by the others ranking. Our 19th guy is Ian Anderson, who is owned by Yuki. And if you look at his roster, or I'll say originally drafted by Griffin and Matt in the 33rd round. Other names in that round include Neil Walker, Alex Cobb, Yadi Molina. You will not see Ian Anderson on Yuki's major league roster because Ian Anderson is currently on his non-prospect and active spot, I believe. I just don't see a scenario where Ian Anderson, or I see a scenario, but I'm not sure he's a viable fantasy starter, or maybe not even a viable major league starter for the Braves at this point. I think they have too many other options, and I just don't think he's quite at the level that they need him to be to start. And I think for that reason, Yuki's going to have to cut bait. And you could argue we should put him above Groom because he's going to probably have to make a decision earlier.
It's tough. I guess it depends on how long he's down in the minors, because if he spends a good chunk of this season in AAA, then Yuki can just stash him there without having to worry about it. Because it's tough because he was really great in that short 2020 season. And even in 2021, he got Rookie of the Year votes both years, which was kind of fun. Yeah, I don't know. It just kind of fell apart for him in 2022. That said, the FIP was 3/4 of a run lower than the ERA. The walk rate wasn't great, but I think I'm not gonna give up on him yet. I think say he makes a good start or two, Yuki calls him up off of that non-prospect inactive. I could see him holding on to him for some chunk of the year. And I could even see him like fully bouncing back and being on Yuki's team for a while.
No, I mean, I think that's fair. I just think Yuki's window for having to make a decision is a week. And, maybe Ian Anderson gets one start and maybe he's been doing well in the minors where Yuki wants to take that chance. I can't get over the high walk rates he's posted. I mean, even when he was getting Rookie of the Year votes in both 2020 and 2021, the walk rates were 390 and 372 per nine. And I think this is kind of what I was talking about with Dylan Cease, right? Where like Dylan Cease's walk rate this past year was like 3.8 something, and he was able to maintain like a solid ERA, like whatever. I know that the peripherals maybe don't support it fully. Ian Anderson's walk rate went up a little bit. It's now sitting at 4.35, and all of a sudden, like you see the downside, he's getting sent down to the minors. I think he could bounce back, but like if that walk rate's not coming down, I just don't see him as a viable fantasy starter. So, maybe I'm just more out on Ian Anderson than you, and that's very fair. But like, I think Yuki's gonna have to make a decision relatively quickly, and if he is competing, he might not want to take that risk. And it seems like he wants to compete again because he did this year. So
Yeah, I guess we'll see. I could see him sticking it out a little bit. But anyway, yeah, we're moving on to number 18, and we chose Helio Ramos, another Ruthvik prospect. He was their 35th round pick. He is the latest pick in the draft still on a roster.
Oh, that's fun. I didn't realize that. Let's see, other players
Yeah,
who won
still on the same roster, that is, to be
on the
clear.
same roster. Yeah, yeah. Other players drafted: Carter Kieboom, Irvin Santana, Brian Anderson, Jesus Luzardo. That's a fun one. Jesus Sanchez, Carson Kelly, Blake Rutherford, Danny Jansen, Brian Reynolds. The Pittsburgh man drafted by Anthony, and then Anthony caught him. That's a shame. Anthony, can we just as a side note, that round 35-36 turn, he won Brian Reynolds, Pete Alonso. It's pretty awesome that late in the
Yeah.
draft. Imagine if he would have kept both. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I think Ramos and Groom just keep getting lumped together for obvious reasons. They're both Ruthvik prospects. He's held on forever. I think some of the shine has kind of rubbed off of Helio Ramos. He wasn't particularly good. He had a 65 WRC plus this year in his second go of it in AAA. I mean, I know he was only 22, and he had a negative 13 WRC plus in 22 plate appearances this year. He's another guy I don't think Ruthvik should be holding on to, but he will. I think the difference between him and Jay Groom is I think there's a little more prospect pedigree with Ramos, and I think it'll take him a little longer to lose that eligibility, perhaps. So I guess that's why I had him ranked slightly lower, but or slightly less likely to go off his roster early. But yeah, he sucks.
Yeah, I remember being really, really high on him and wanting to trade for him in like 2019. Kind of glad I did not. But yeah, I agree. He's kind of lost a lot of the shine. Frankly, the only reason I had him head of Ian Anderson was just the fact that Ruthvik's really stubborn about his prospects.
Yeah, I don't really understand why he's so stubborn, but I think he's gonna have to make decisions this year. So, I can you imagine a scenario where either of these guys are on his roster at the end of the year? Because I can't.
I could see, I could definitely see Helio Ramos making one more, one more year on the prospect sheet for him.
Maybe. I mean, they did just sign a bunch of outfielders. The Giants did, so maybe that keeps them in the minors a little longer. But maybe even Groom, honestly, if the Padres just refuse to call him up because they have so much pitching. But
Yeah, I mean Ramos is only 23, so it's if he spends another year in the minors and Ruthvik doesn't have any intention on cutting him, then and that's where then he'll still be on that sheet come next year.
yeah, and I think that is the other thing with Groom v. Ramos is Groom is going to turn 25 during the season, so at some point it's like he's got to do something. Uh, but yeah, I think those are four relatively uncontroversial names. This next one, I think, raises the stakes a little more. Our 17th player, my 15th, and your 19th. So after Grandal and Groom, this is the guy you think is going to be off a roster. I think this is a little bit of a hot take. It's Matt Manning.
Yeah, so Matt Manning,
Yeah.
it's tough on most. If they weren't these big Tigers guys, then I think he'd be off their roster by now. But even still, they've got 14 starting pitchers. They gotta clear out. Matt Manning is probably the odd man out to begin with. And I don't know. I don't have a ton of faith in him. They've already got all of these other Tiger starters. And I know he's kind of their guy, but on the other hand, I could see Zane making like a really dramatic post about we're saying goodbye to our guy. He just wasn't cutting it anymore. Goodbye, Matt Manning.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be surprised if Zane kind of went the other way with some of these Tigers guys if it just doesn't work out. I mean, some of the surface stats were okay this year for Matt Manning. The 686 K per nine is not going to cut it. That was his K rate in the majors, but it was higher in the minors. I'm just not particularly confident in him. It sounds like he had a little bit of some injury issues. Looks like some forearm issues. I just he's been their one Tiger to kind of stuck with throughout, for better or for worse. And I wonder if they're going to give a little time for this Tiger core, given that now they're officially retooling, and two, like Zane's finally basically reacquired all of the relevant Tigers, other than maybe Jackson Jobe. So, but like you said, it's Zane. Like Zane's traded away Riley Green before. Zane's traded away Casey Mize before. Like I wouldn't be surprised if he just ships off Manning. So I think both of us think it might happen a little sooner rather than later. So, but they've also traded away guys we didn't think they were going to trade away. I mean, I'm thinking like Trey Turner and Shohei Ohtani. So, it wouldn't be uncharted.
Yeah, even Verlander this past year.
Yeah, Verlander. Yeah, another good example. So. You give Zane a good offer. I know they say some guys are untouchable, but Zane is one of those guys, and I think you're another one, i.e., like you with the athlete trade earlier, where you're not going to turn down an offer that's just too good to turn down. So, yeah, you never know.
You never know. Yeah, let's move on now. Up next in 16th, even though we both had this ranked 17th, that's Kenley Jansen from Yuki's team.
Yeah, I mean, Kenley Jansen's a 6-year-old now closer. Let's search this up. I know he's kind of old. 35. He'll turn 36 in the end of September. I think Kenley's just kind of rolling along. I think that he's definitely past his peak. I do think he has a relatively safe floor, and Yuki really values the saves and these relievers, especially with his very below average starting rotation group, which Yuki will readily admit is below average. I do have a little bit of concerns with, because Kenley is like this, takes like the most amount of time in between pitches as anyone, so I do have a little bit of worry about that, like him getting adjusted to that. But for me, it's really just the age and the fact he's a reliever.
Yeah, I agree. Yuki's got a lot of relievers on his roster already. He's going to be getting saves from Duvall and Scott Barlow. So say it's the middle of the season and Yuki's out of contention, or even if he's looking to upgrade somewhere else. If he's in contention, I could see him realizing that Jansen's the odd man out and trying to get some value for him in his advanced age. Or additionally, say Jansen loses the job. He's older. He could just totally bust this year, and Yuki could end up cutting him. So I think, yeah, I could very easily see Jansen being gone from Yuki's team by August.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I know Yuki talked trades with him about him both at the trade deadline and in right before the season last year. And I know this offseason he's talked a few Jansen related trades as well. So it would not surprise me if Jansen left Yuki's roster at some point. But yeah, do we want to move on to the next guy?
Yeah. Up next, this is an interesting one. In 15th place is Nick Castellanos.
Yeah. If we did this a year ago, I think he would have been ranked lower. I guess lower, right? How are we calling these? Like higher would be like Grandal, and lower would be like the guy we have as the least likely to move.
I would kind of word it the other way, but
okay. Well, whatever it is, I think Castellanos a year ago would be more likely than he is now to stick on my roster. I think he's coming off a down year. First year in Philly, maybe there was, he's going through some injury stuff. I still think he might have been affected a little bit by a wrist injury that he suffered in early May. And I think it's a scenario where, like, if he bounces back, it's not that I'm going to, like, try and get him off my roster, but, like, obviously, he could become attractive in trade talks, and maybe I decide to flip him. Like, I've been packaged guys like George Springer this offseason for other guys I've liked, and I've acquired a couple other outfielders, so you never know. And if he's bad, I might just flat out get rid of him. Because, it'll be a year and a half or 2 years now of him just not really performing well, and maybe he's just kind of past his prime. I'm not saying it's like a put up or shut up year for him, because I definitely see the scenario where he bounces back a bit and stays on my roster. But I'm not sure. He was my most consistent outfielder in 2021, and then fell apart last year. So it's just, I don't know. I think time will tell there, but I wouldn't be surprised if a year from now he's off my roster. And I will say, there have been multiple times I've come very close to trading him, and at the last second something happens and the trade doesn't go through. So it's not like I've been not trying to move him.
Yeah, I agree. I was kind of surprised seeing you put him down in your 16 spot. So that's kind of what convinced me to put him down lower, just because, you know, if you're thinking of moving him, then I will take your word for it. And especially if he's kind of pushed his way out of your core bats, then you will have no hesitation in moving on from him.
Exactly. Yeah. I really have no hesitation if guys are out of my core to move on from them. If it means I can acquire someone else I think will be part of my core. So absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that kind of leads us nicely into number 14, who's a very similar guy. That's Chris Bryant, my first round pick, where he's not really one of my core bats anymore. And I know I'm not as keen on trading my fringy or second next tier guys as you are, which is why Bryant's a little higher. But yeah, I feel like him and Castellanos are kind of similar in that regard.
Yeah, I'm glad they ended up being right next to each other for that reason. I think the two reasons I did have Bryant as less likely to move are, one, you mentioned, you don't like to trade as much. Two, or three reasons, I guess. Two, he was your first round pick. And I think at the end of the day, that does mean a little something to you, whereas Castellanos, I think, was my 11th round pick. 11th. And at least when Bryant was healthy last year, he was hitting well. It was more of a question of health than the actual performance, whereas I think there might be some legitimate performance concerns for Castellanos. So,
yeah, that's the thing. I've kind of lately, and I wasn't always this way because I couldn't have traded away Byron Buxton fast enough. But lately, this past year or two, I've been kind of on guys that are good but not the most healthy, like guys like Clayton Kershaw, or even Bryant and Anthony Rendon. I'm kind of more patient with these guys because it's like, you know, if they're healthy, then they're going to put up good numbers, and if they're hurt, then, you know, I can find a streamer and I can kind of use that as a streaming spot to my benefit, and kind of I'm at the point where I feel like my roster is good, that it's nice to have a little flexibility sometimes. And obviously I don't want my guys to get hurt, but I think it's nice to, you know, be able to move guys in and out sometimes.
No, I get it. I'd take 100 games of a great player than 150 games of a mediocre player. Because you can
exactly, and I've kind of learned the value of that a little more, which is why guys like Bryant, I'm okay with.
Hey, that's why, Lance McCullers is not the type of guy I really would have taken on before this year, but I kind of saw similar utility. So I totally get that. I do think Brian, unless he ridiculously bottoms out this year, I think will probably be on your roster through the year.
Yeah, or unless Andrew gives me an offer I can't refuse.
That too. I put him here at 14, but I'm trying to think of what the scenario is that he would leave your roster, and I'm not 100% sure what it is. Because if he's hitting well, you're not going to move him, and if he's not doing well, unless you want to just kind of dump him in a buy low type of deal, I don't know if I see it. Maybe we should have put him as a little less likely to be moved. Although looking at some of the guys ahead of him, I think it's justified having him where he is, and I think it just shows how tough it gets for some of these guys. But you ready to move on to the next guy?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's been kind of a shift, or there's a shift in our rankings now. We're moving from guys who we think are going to move soon to guys who are thinking okay, these are long-term guys. How long is that going to be? And up next, that brings us to number 13, Xander Bogaerts of Anthony's team.
Yeah, it's interesting. You and I, these next two guys, we have flip-flopped in their rankings, but they're both very different rankings. I have Bogaerts ranked 13th because while I think Bogaerts could potentially be a foundational piece for Anthony as he kind of transitions through this rebuild, he is also a 30-year-old shortstop, and as we've seen this offseason, Anthony has taken the opportunity to go out and acquire some younger guys. He swapped out a 32-year-old Kevin Gausman to get a 26-year-old Freddie Peralta. He did acquire a young shortstop this offseason in O'Neal Cruz, who obviously is the Pirates fan. I think he's very high on and is a very toolsy guy. So the Bogaerts replacement might be in-house, and I do think that Anthony could get quite a haul for Bogaerts if he decides to move him. So while I'm not necessarily sitting here thinking like, hey, it's a lock that Anthony's going to move Bogaerts, if his season kind of starts off poorly, as we might expect with him making some more retooling, rebuilding type moves, which he's been on this podcast readily admitting that he's kind of trying to do, it wouldn't surprise me if Bogaerts gets moved. At the same time, we've talked before in this podcast that he has a lot of interesting arms now. I mean, Alcantara, Manoah, Christian Javier is as the lead of a top three as anybody else has. If that rotation kind of keeps him relevant, maybe instead of trading Bogaerts, he's adding two Bogaerts at the trade deadline. So I'll be interested to see how this plays out, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he gets moved.
Yeah, I agree. I think, he could be one of the next guys on Anthony's team to move. Although Anthony is very under wraps about his deals, and really most people can be moved at any time. We would have thought 3 months ago that Kyle Tucker was a top 5 guy on this list, and suddenly he's not on Anthony's team anymore.
Exactly, and I think that sums us up. Or like, we could be very wrong about this. Like maybe Jay Groom just keeps kicking it in the minors and never gets called up, and Ruthvik's like, fuck it, I'm just going to keep him. And like 5 years from now, he's like a 28-year-old in AAA or something. Like you never know. I don't think it's going to be happen, to be clear, but like, you never know. Like, weirder shit has happened in this league.
Yeah, I agree.
But you have Bogaerts up at 8, so I think you were less so than me thinking that he could be moved. I think you're thinking like he's going to be there for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as a good shortstop being hard to find. I think of, Anthony not wanting to move on from some of his top players. I don't know, 8 might have been a little too high, but he was a difficult one to place for me.
I think so too. I think this next guy kind of sums that up too, because so I had Bogaerts 13, you had Bogaerts 8. Well, you had Yelich 13, I had Yelich 8, and he is our 12th overall composite. Why did you rank Christian Yelich 13th? And then I'll explain why I ranked him 8th.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of similar logic to the Castellanos logic. He's a guy who's outside of your top tier guys, and therefore you just move all those guys at will. You've traded George Springer like 4 times now. So yeah, you move these guys a lot, and the fact that you have that attachment to Yelich puts him ahead of Castellanos, but at the same time, your team is no longer named after Yelich, so who knows? That link is kind of gone now. So we'll see. I don't expect him to be moved right away, but I think he's someone who certainly less than he was 3 years ago, likely to remain on your team.
Yeah, sure. I guess so. So the reason I put him at 8 was unlike twofold. One, he is my boy, so I have to give him some credit for that. But number 2, like Castellanos, he did post a very good season. So he's not driving in 100 runs like he did in 18 or 19, but he scored 99 runs, had 14 homers and 19 steals last year. And more importantly, he stayed healthy for the full season. He played 154 games. That's actually the most he has ever played in a single season in a Brewer uniform, believe it or not. He had a 355 OBP, which in an OBP league is fantastic. And like, yeah, he the 36 home run, 44 home run years, those are probably gone. Those aren't coming back. But if he can be a 15-20 guy with a solid OBP and a boatload of runs, I'll take that. I'm not trying to make him out to be my elite outfield one anymore. I have other guys who I have ranked above him in my outfield, Mookie Betts and Cedric Mullins. Tatis is probably eventually only going to be outfield eligible and will definitely be above him. But I think he could be a very effective, outfield, 3 outfield 4 type guy for me. And if I trade him away, I'm probably just going to have to try and replace him with a similar guy. So why not just keep my boy and have him, play that role? So again, things could change, if he, really tanks this year, or if I get a really good offer and he's a piece in it. I'm not opposed to trading him. I think you're right. It's more likely than it was like 3 years ago. But I think I'm likely to hold on to him. So for the moment. So
Yeah, that's fair enough. And let's talk about up next at number 11 is another one of your guys. That's Freddie Freeman.
Yeah. You had him ranked 11. I had him ranked 9. The reason I had Freeman ranked as a little more likely than Yelich is because Freeman is a couple years older. And while I do think Freeman is like the ultimate safe player, and I think he's just going to age ridiculously well, I think one thing I have made very clear is that I care about the age of players. And you saw me kind of purge almost all of my 33 or older players this offseason. The only 2 I hung on to, or I guess Freeman's technically 32, but he'll turn 33 during the season. But the only 2 that I held on to that are turning 33 during the season are Freeman and Altuve. So I think the age made it a little more likely that I would move him. But I really have no intention of moving Freddie Freeman as long as he keeps performing this way. He's also my boy. So, I mean, it's basically a tie. I had to rank one above the other, but,
Yeah, I agree. I don't find him very likely to move at least anytime soon. He's still a great hitter, but the fact that, he is on the older side, and the fact that you do have Pete Alonso at the same position, who's quite a bit younger, could see Freeman forced out in the next 2 to 3 years, perhaps.
Yeah, that wouldn't totally surprise me. I think like Alonso right now fits well in that CI spot. I think I would have to find somebody who I'm comfortable enough in that CI spot. And I get that it's probably not going to be as good as Alonso is there, but like I probably need that replacement before I could go and move Freeman, because I don't think that replacement exists on my major league roster or in the farm at the moment. So, but you know how often I trade, so maybe that fixes there somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Cracking the top 10 now. We're halfway through the list. Number 10, we put Nolan Arenado from Daniel and Matt's team. Third baseman. They've had a great season, and I could see him being a piece that they try and trade for a haul. I know they've been in discussions about him, and they're not really doing it without an elite offer coming back to them. But yeah, I thought this was kind of a good spot for him.
Yeah, I think the offers that they were looking at for him are just ridiculously high. And I also think he's kind of the one guy they want to hold on to as they, try to get back into relevancy. And I don't really see, I just like, unless somebody comes and blows them away, I just really don't see what's going to convince them to move him. I think their price on Arenado is notably higher than their price has been on other very solid players. So that's why we had a little bit of a vote split here. I had him at 7, you had him at 12. I think in hindsight, I probably should have put him a little lower. Maybe Arenado would then flip with like Freeman and or Yelich, but like I don't know. I don't see him moving anytime soon.
Yeah, it's tough. They are a rebuilding team, and they're kind of starting to make more and more moves. But yeah, this is one we'll have to see. And I could see him being traded at this year's deadline. I could also see him sticking with this team for a very long time. He's got a kind of a wide set of error bars there.
Exactly. And it's not like Arenado is super old at the moment. I think he is. Let me double check his age. He is 31. So I guess conceivably, he could, or he'll turn 32 early in the season. So functionally 32. But like, if they think they can compete in the next 2-3 years, holding on to him is not the worst idea. I'm not sure I would do it, but it's not the worst idea.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I don't know if I would either. It really depends on the haul that I'd be able to get for him if I were in their shoes.
Yeah.
But yeah, up next at number 9 is the third player out of 4 to come from your team, and your last remaining player. It's Jose Altuve.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had it going Yelich 8, Freeman 9, Altuve 10. And on our composite rankings, because you rank them the opposite, we have them going Yelich, Freeman, Altuve. I guess maybe some bonus points to Altuve for being a first round pick. The very first pick I ever made. I was really high on him coming off his MVP season when I drafted him. I think that being said with him, he is a guy who, I don't know, he's just great. Second base is a little tricky for me. Like, I don't have obvious replacements. Like, I have a couple of prospects coming up in Jorge Polanco, but nobody obviously and Max Muncy, but nobody obviously in the same tier as Altuve. So maybe that keeps him on my roster a little longer. And he did kind of rejuvenate a bit this past season, and second base is so thin where I'm not really having too much of a concern with keeping him on my roster in the short term, but he is also turning 33 in May. So, there definitely needs to come a point where I need to think about replacing him. But his 164 WRC plus this past season was actually his career high. So 6.6 WAR season. So I don't know. We'll see. I'm still a big fan of my boy Altuve.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it. He gets a boost from being your first round pick. He's also someone that you've talked a lot about lately, being better than he gets credit for. And then yeah, second base being thin, for sure. Number 8. This is the player that I think the most we didn't know what to do with. And that's Yoan Moncada. Early pick for Connor. As a matter of fact, the third round pick that we gave him. If we did this 3 years ago, I think Moncada would have been number 1.
Yeah.
But this year was rough for him. And we've seen Connor be more willing to move White Sox guys lately. He moved Andrew Vaughn this year. But that being said, Moncada is kind of his guy. His team was named Yoan Moncada for over a year, maybe even over 2 years. And I could see him sticking with him until the end. I could also see him, moving on from him soon.
Yeah, I mean, Moncada has had one really good season in 2019, kind of the rabbit ball year. He's been okay otherwise. I don't think he really moves the needle. He's somebody who I get why is rostered and should probably be rostered, but I'm not sure I see the upside anymore, or really think he's someone who's just going to bounce back in a significant way. And I wonder if, Connor, who's been in a win now mode and hasn't been afraid to make aggressive moves, might be like, hey, it's time to move off of him. I do think one thing that could keep him on Connor's roster, in addition to being a White Sox, is that his third base depth he's on super deep there. So he has DJ LeMahieu and Justin Turner, but they're both older. They've been dealing with some injury issues. He's still rostering John Birdie, who I think he'll probably cut soon. I think John Birdie is a flash in the pan. And then Wilmer Flores is just kind of whatever. I don't think he's anything super special. And I know that in the case of LeMahieu and Flores, they might be needed as Trevor Story's replacement at second base because he doesn't have any other second base. All right, he has Semien. I take that back. But yeah, I don't know. I had him ranked 12. I think this is our biggest split because I thought Connor might wisen up and just kind of cut him if he can upgrade at third. But
It's tough to upgrade at third.
you know what I don't know if this is because third is very top heavy and very thin. But one move I could hypothetically see is Daniel being like, "Hey, I'll take Moncada and some other stuff, and I'll give you Arenado," because that's a way that Connor could be like, "Hey, I've meaningfully upgraded at third, and it sucks to give up Moncada, but it is a real upgrade." And maybe Daniel can sleep a little better about giving up Moncada, knowing that he got a White Sox, and at least like he's 27, and maybe he could kind of look at him and be like, "Here's where I see there's still some upside or something." Depend on the other.
That's interesting. When was the last time we saw two guys lose their yellow boxes in one trade? I know Joey Gallo and Anthony Rendon did. Have we had one since?
That's a great question. I couldn't even tell you the last.
I feel like I remember talking about another one.
I feel like there has been. This might be something we have to figure out off the air. I can't name. I mean, Kyle Tucker was the last yellow box to go. There are quite a few yellow boxes that left recently. Kenta Maeda was another one. Who was actually, I don't know if he was a yellow. He was a yellow box at one point. I don't know for how long.
Everyone was a yellow box at one point.
Well, touche.
I guess not everyone, but yeah.
Yeah. I get your point. We can search this up off the air. I'm sure there's an interesting answer to this question that we just don't know. I think what we could be seeing more likely is like yellow boxes, but like one of the yellow boxes is from one of the rookie drafts. And not necessarily two from the overall.
Yeah, that's true too. We've only got two yellow boxes left from the 2019 rookie draft.
Yeah, a couple of those guys got cut or changed hands this offseason. So yeah, it's who would have thought that the last two names would be Jared Kelenic and Alec Thomas?
And yeah, who knows what's going to be made of those guys. Not a lot of guys left from 2020 either. But I could see Manoah and Kirby sticking for a long time.
And Carroll will be
Carroll too.
Yeah.
Moving on though, cracking the top 7. Just moving right along. We have Aaron Judge. And interestingly, I had him ranked lower than you did.
Yeah, I think Judge is tricky because, like, as you mentioned this offseason that you were at least willing to shop Judge, and like the problem is just like it was going to be so hard for you to get an offer commensurate with how he played last year, because I think people in a dynasty league probably don't value him as the guy he did last year. They probably value him closer to his career numbers. And I know that Judge is a guy that you really like. I know that. I think you've been a little higher on him than a lot of people have in this league. I know I personally, the injury issues with him scared the hell out of me. And given his body type, I would not be surprised if his value just kind of plummets in a couple of years. But like he's just kind of been your boy, and I think he's kind of overtaken Bryant in terms of your longer. How do I phrase this? I think he's overtaken what Bryant means to you. I do think there are other players who might mean more to you at this point, but I think he has overtaken like the Bryant role. So I also think that maybe gives him a little bit of an edge. He was another one like Moncada, and like some of these other guys we have big splits on that I think were just really hard to rank. So like I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow somebody throws you an appropriate offer, he's off your roster, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he's on your team for another 5 years.
Exactly, yeah. And I think 7 is an okay spot for him because he's someone that I have entertained offers on, but I haven't found anything that's really been interesting to me. Um, so so it's interesting. Yeah, I'm very happy to hold on to him, of course. But if something does come along, then yeah, I'll definitely consider selling high on him, especially if say Kellenic uh comes out hot this year, and I could definitely sell high on Judge. That'd make me feel a little better about doing so.
Yeah, I almost think he's just so obvious of a sell high candidate to the point where it just makes him impossible to trade.
I
Um,
think that's definitely right.
and I think like if we did this again next off season and like depending on the type of season Judge has, like um, you know, unless he absolutely tanks it, I still think he's gonna have a bunch of trade value. But like if he hypothetically repeated this year, I think you could trade him for a haul. And even if he just kind of reverts to what he was before this year, as long as he stays healthy, I think you could get a haul for him as well. So and again, like the Adley trade proved, you'll trade your guys if the right offer comes around. I think you more than anybody else really care about the value that you get back in a trade and are not willing to make a massive pivot if the value is there. So, but
Yeah, no, I if there's value there, then I'll do it. But if there's not value there, then I definitely won't.
absolutely. Nice way to sum up how to make trades. But anyways, let's move on to the next guy. Number 6. This is another one we had a big split on. Another 6 rank split. I had him as my 11th. You had him at 5th. And composite ended up being 6th. That's Alex Bregman. Um, Another Ruthvik owned guy. Um, why don't you talk first about why you had Bregman ranked 5th?
I just know, and I know Ruthvik likes to trade bats, but I mean, as someone who's tried to trade for Bregman, it doesn't feel like he's going anywhere. And he's young, and he's really one of the few um, uh, between him and another guy we're about to talk about a little later. Those are kind of his core guys on the hitting side, and I don't really see him budging there.
Yeah, I think he could be a core guy for Ruthvik, but I know Ruthvik has also entertained offers for him in the past, and I think between the other guy we might mention later and also Acuna, I think he's kind of number 3. And I wonder if maybe it makes it a little easier for Ruthvik to part. We've also seen Ruthvik part with players, that we think, we're surprised that he's, kind of moving on from before, i.e. DeGrom. And I wonder if something just might happen there where he moves on from Bregman. Not that I think it's super likely he's going to move Bregman this offseason, but he does have another guy at the position that, I think also makes it a little easier for Ruthvik to move on from him. So we'll see. That one's tough. I think there's a tier break here for me as we get into these last 5 guys in terms of like, I don't know about you. I think these last 5 guys, more likely than not, will retire on the team that they're on. But
Yeah,
I'm
I
curious
th
what you think.
I think so. Yeah, we're cracking the top 5 here, and I agree. There's a bit of a break. Number 5, we have Bryce Harper from Yuki's team.
Yeah. Interestingly, you're a little bit you think he's a little more likely to move. You had him at 7, I had him at 5. I wonder if the injury issues maybe make him a little more likely to move, which I guess for me was why I had him at 5. But I also just think Yuki, I think he's one of those guys Yuki's just going to be really stubborn about keeping. Obviously, Harper's an awesome hitter. I think Yuki's going to weather this year with him missing a bit of the season and then just having to DH a bunch and Honestly, if Yuki is willing to go through that with Harper, I don't see Yuki getting rid of Harper anytime soon. So, and it doesn't seem like he's had any interest after the Harper surgery news and moving him. I know I've asked, I'm sure other people have asked. So, I'd be surprised if he's off of Yuki's roster anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point we're talking about 5 to 6 years down the line if these
Yeah.
guys are going to move, and I think I guess more than some of these other guys remaining, I could see, yeah, sure, Yuki trades away a 36-year-old Harper if he's rebuilding.
Sure, yeah, or if there's a big Diamondback who like rises up or something, or a big array, right? I could see Harper being the type of guy that moves, but I don't think Yuki has any short term plans to move him.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so. But yeah, this is all long term, and which brings us to the top four. And these are all four guys we agree on their order.
Yep.
And these are four guys we agree are going to remain on their teams until they retire, which means number 4 is Mike Trout, because I know Anthony doesn't plan on moving Mike Trout ever. And I don't expect him to move Mike Trout ever. But of these four guys remaining, I think Mike Trout will retire the earliest.
Yeah,
That's the
I
goal.
think so too. Yeah, I think he'll retire the earliest. He's definitely the oldest. He has had a little bit of injury issues, so that did kind of put him above the other guys for me as well. I don't really have injury concerns about the three guys below him. But I think we always knew once Anthony drafted Trout that Trout was going to retire on his roster, and it doesn't surprise me that we have him ranked like this. I would say a couple of years ago, it'd probably be the easy number one, but some of these other guys have just played so well that I think they've passed him.
I agree. And I think it'd be interesting if we re-ranked this in 2 or 3 years to see how we feel. But we're at the top three now. Number 3, we chose Rafael Devers.
Honestly, this should be a yearly activity because I'd be really interested in seeing how different our rankings are year by year with this, like whoever is left, and seeing
Yeah.
who is right about leaving rosters. This should be a yearly segment.
Oh, yeah, we can keep that in mind. It'll become easier to do every year.
It will. I'm not. It's not like when there's like three guys left, we don't need to have a full segment about it. But we'll definitely mention it each year. But right, yeah, you're right. So you said number 3, Rafael Devers. He just signed that long term deal in Boston. I don't think he's going to go anywhere. I think the difference I have between him and the guys who came below him were one. I think Ruthvik could be a little more unpredictable. With some of the guys he trades. 2, he is slightly older than the guys we're going to talk about afterwards. And 3, I just think Devers kind of has that body type where I don't know if it's going to age super well. Where maybe I could see, maybe all some of these other guys are more, hey, 36, 37, 38, maybe Devers is kind of like 35. It's just kind of like, that's that. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm just kind of speculating here, but when you get this deep into it, it's just kind of any tiebreaker you could think of. So
Exactly. Yeah, I think I'd say he's more likely to not retire on Ruthvik's team than Trout is to not retire on Anthony's team.
yes,
However, Devers is going to retire 6, 7 years later than Trout anyway. And I think Ruthvik's, um, he's more likely to trade a 37-year-old Devers than Anthony is to trade a 37-year-old Trout, but the time frames are offset, and I think by the time Trout is retired, Devers will still be on Ruthvik's roster, even if Ruthvik gets rid of him at a later point.
I think so. Yeah, Trout will turn 32 during the season, and Devers just turned 26 in October. So we're talking like a 5.5, 6 year difference. It's pretty significant. If it was more like 2.5 or 3, I think they'd be flip flop. But five and a
Yeah.
half to 6 is like a lot. Um, that's longer than the league has been around. So uh, number 2, we both said Bo Bichette.
We did.
I the difference for me between Devers and Bichette was literally just Bichette's younger, but I don't know. Like, I've never been a big Bichette guy. Like, he's not like I just never liked the low walk rates. I think Jake's going to keep him for a while because like he's been one of the centerpieces of him building up this team, and obviously Bichette is still a very elite player. But like I'm just not a big Bichette guy. So it also wouldn't surprise me if like something happens and you know, Jake, as someone who's just very smart and wants to get value, like will move Bichette and be like, hey, I could extract some value. I mean, look at Jeremy Pena, right? You thought that could be a guy, or O'Neal Cruz could be long-term pieces on his team, and then he flipped them to get Corey Seager and Kyle Tucker, respectively. So, you know, I could see him doing something similar with Bichette, hypothetically, 4 or 5 years down the road, you know. But I don't think he's moving in the short term.
Yeah, I agree. And I do agree that I think he's the worst player of the top five that we have.
Yeah.
But yeah, like Devers, and I think we could have had him and Devers flip-flopped. But like Devers, he is a team namesake, and he's someone the owner really is trying to build the team around. And yeah, he's super young. He's only 24. I don't see him moving anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, even if one of us would have flipped our vote, I don't think it really would have made a difference here. But yeah, I mean, I think they're more like Bichette and Devers are 2A and 2B. Like there were a couple of these that were basically ties for me, but you know, I have to assign different numbers too. So I think it's just kind of how it is. Bichette being a year and a half younger is like a big tiebreaker, a year younger. I think number one's on his own tier though. Why don't you introduce number one?
Yeah, so number one, of course, who else but Vlad Jr. He was my draft pick in the inaugural draft in round, I want to say 7.
I'm pulling it up.
Round 6. He was my 6th round pick. I followed him all through the minors. He's he was drafted as a prospect by my team. He's been my guy. I was a co-worker of his with the 2018 New Hampshire Fisher Cats, and he came up. He struggled a little bit at the start, but has fully come into his own and become what we expected him to be. Particularly in 2021, he fully burst onto the scene. He's listed as third baseman here, which is very funny. I'd forgotten that he came up as a third baseman. And I think he'll be my first baseman for as long as he's playing. I don't foresee myself moving on from him. There were times where maybe pre-breakout I considered moving him a little bit. And yeah, I'll entertain some offers, sure. But I'm, fully comfortable keeping him on my team for the long haul. He's my guy.
Yeah, I think we talked about before where you were like, hey, if the value's good, like you'll be willing to entertain offers and like definitely trade him. I think there is a very big difference between someone like Bryant and even Judge, given their age and injury history, versus like Vlad, who you know doesn't really come with a ton of risks. And like, you know, you drafted him as a prospect fully expecting he was going to be your guy. So yeah, I think this was the easy decision for number one. And definitely the easiest decision, I think, maybe other than number 21 on this list.
Yeah, I think it did, but I'm interested in keeping track of our list. We have kept the receipts, and we're gonna keep tabs on who the actual rankings end up being. I'm excited to see how wrong we are. There's one of my favorite baseball articles is back in 2015 or so. This guy kept track to see, hey, who the last baseball player who played in the 90s, the last one standing is going to be. And there were like 21 or so at the time also. And, you know, the answer ended up being Bartolo Colon. And that was not at all what the person thought. So I don't know, maybe maybe Kenley Jansen ends up on Yuki's team 10 years from now, and he's the last one standing.
Yeah, could you imagine if Kenley just keeps pitching like that? Like, he just keeps pitching well. And fuck, I mean, so some of these relievers pitch really well for a while. Like you just never know. That wouldn't. It would surprise me, but like, hey, you never know. Weirder shit happens. That's the beauty of baseball. But I do have some questions for you before we wrap up this segment. So, as I alluded to earlier, this is the 1800th day of league history. The league started on March 25th, 2018. At the day of recording, it is February 27th, 2023. Amazing how far we have made it. How many of these players do you think are still yellow boxes, aka on the same roster on day 3600?
So that would be 6 years from now, 5 years from now.
Let's give an exact date. That would be February 1st of 2028 is 1800 days from today.
Okay, 2028. So 5 years in the future, I'm going to say the top 7 from our list.
Top 7. So you're saying the 7 are Vlad, Bichette, Devers, Trout, Harper, Bregman, and Judge? Or do you mean your individual top 7?
Let's go with the combined top 7. I don't I'm not gonna be too think too much about this.
Thinking's good, Cam. Should do it more often. Maybe your team would win championships. Ouch. I got you. My answer is 5. I think it's going to be our bottom 5. I think it'll be Vlad, Bichette, Devers, Trout, and Harper.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. We'll check back in 5 years to see who's right. But yeah, this was a lot of fun. I'm excited to keep track of it in the future. And yeah, I'm trying to find that article about the last baseball player who played in the 90s. I couldn't find it, but that's okay. Either way, yeah, we'll see you next time.
Yep. Until then, see you next time.
I swam across, I jumped across for you. Oh, what a thing to do. 'Cause you were all yellow. I drew a line, I drew a line for you. Oh, what a thing to do. And it was all yellow.
This podcast is good.